General Thax Mordun stood before the massive holographic display in the command center of his flagship, the Decimator, watching the swirling blue-green planet below with the kind of bored expression usually reserved for grocery shopping. 3 centuries of military conquest had taught him that most species fell into predictable categories: the ones who surrendered immediately, the ones who put up a token fight before surrendering, and the ones who were too stupid to surrender until after he'd blown up half their cities. Humans, he mused, would probably fall into Category 3. Sir, his aide, Lieutenant Krix Volin, approached with a datapad clutched in his 6-fingered hands. The intelligence report on the human colony is complete. Thax accepted the pad without looking away from the planet. New harmony, they called it. How quaint, how utterly, pathetically quaint. The humans had been here for barely 50 of their years, trying to grow crops and build little houses like children playing in a sandbox. Meanwhile, the Korillian Empire had been conquering star systems when these primates were still figuring out fire. "Let me guess," Thax said, his voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm that had become his trademark among the fleet. "They have some primitive projectile weapons, maybe a few atmospheric fighters that can barely break orbit, and their idea of advanced technology is indoor plumbing." "Actually, sir, they do have indoor plumbing," Krix replied, completely missing the joke. "Also hydroponic systems, fusion reactors, and what appears to be a small defensive grid." Thax finally turned to look at his aide, one eyebrow raised in mock surprise. "Fusion reactors? My. They've graduated from rubbing sticks together. I'm sure the Emperor will be impressed when I tell him we needed our entire Third Fleet to handle such a technologically advanced civilization." The bridge crew chuckled at their commander's wit. It was easy to laugh when you were standing on a ship that could glass planets and had shields that could withstand the combined firepower of most system navies. The Decimator alone carried enough firepower to reduce New Harmony to molten slag in under an hour. "Sir, the colony has approximately 200,000 inhabitants," Krix continued, reading from his pad. "Intelligence suggests they're primarily agricultural workers, scientists, and their families. Military presence appears minimal." "Minimal," Thax repeated, savoring the word like fine wine. "How minimal are we talking?" "A few dozen security guards with stun weapons." "Approximately 500 individuals with military training, sir. They appear to have some ground-based defense systems, but nothing that should pose a significant threat to our forces." Thax nodded sagely, as if this information required deep contemplation. 500 soldiers. Against his fleet of 37 ships, each crewed by elite Korillian warriors who had been bred for war since birth. It was almost insulting, really. The Empire had assigned him enough firepower to conquer a mid-tier civilization, and he was being asked to use it against what amounted to a farming community with delusions of grandeur. "Tell me, Krix," Thax said, turning back to the display, "in your professional opinion, how long do you think this will take?" "Standard protocol suggests a full planetary assault takes approximately 6 hours, sir. However, given the primitive nature of their defenses, I estimate we could have complete control within 3 hours. 3 hours? Thax shook his head in disappointment. And here I was hoping for at least a challenge. Do you know what we did to the Zentoran Defense Force last month? They had quantum shields, plasma cannons, and a fleet of 200 ships. We finished them in 4 hours. These humans don't even have a proper navy. The truth was, Thax had been hoping for something more stimulating than a glorified police action. The Korillian Empire had been expanding for over a millennium, and most of their recent conquests had been disappointingly easy. Advanced civilizations tended to surrender once they saw the fleet. Less advanced ones usually folded after the first demonstration of superior firepower. "Sir, shall I give the order to begin the assault?" Krix asked. Thax considered this for a moment, watching the peaceful planet rotating slowly below them. Somewhere down there, 200,000 humans were going about their daily lives, completely unaware that their world was about to change forever. They were probably tending their gardens, teaching their children, maybe even looking up at the stars and wondering if they were alone in the universe. Well, they were about to find out. "Signal the fleet," Thax commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never lost a battle. All ships are to assume attack formation. We'll give them one chance to surrender unconditionally. After that, we proceed with standard conquest protocol. Understood, sir. Shall I prepare the usual terms? Oh, why not? Thax said with a theatrical sigh. Though I doubt they'll be smart enough to take them. Humans have this annoying tendency to fight hopeless battles. Something about pride or honor or some other primitive emotion they haven't evolved past yet. As his crew moved to carry out his orders, Thax allowed himself a small smile. 3 hours, Crix had said. He'd give it 2, just to prove a point. After all, what could go wrong? The initial bombardment went exactly as Thax had expected, which is to say, it was boring. His ships rained down precise energy blasts on the colony's defensive installations, each shot calculated to disable rather than destroy. The Korillian Empire preferred their conquests intact, thank you very much. Ruined planets were significantly less profitable than functioning ones. Target the communication arrays first, Thax ordered, settling into his command chair with the enthusiasm of someone watching paint dry. Then the power grid. Standard procedure, gentlemen. Try not to fall asleep at your stations. The human response was, frankly, embarrassing. A few scattered shots from ground-based plasma cannons that barely scratched the paint on his shields. Some atmospheric fighters that buzzed around like angry insects before being swatted down by his interceptors. It was almost insulting how little effort they were putting into their own defense. Sir, Communications Officer Zel Maxime reported, we're receiving a transmission from the colony. Already? Thax raised an eyebrow. That has to be some kind of record. Put it through. The main screen flickered to life, revealing a human woman in what appeared to be a military uniform. She had dark hair pulled back in a practical style and eyes that looked far too calm for someone whose world was currently under attack. The nameplate on her uniform read Brooks. This is Commander Alexa Brooks of the New Harmony Colonial Defense Force, she said, her voice steady despite the explosions visible in the background behind her. I'm assuming you're the ones responsible for the light show outside. Thax blinked. In 3 centuries of conquest, he'd never had an enemy open negotiations with sarcasm. Usually it was all begging and threats and dramatic speeches about freedom. This human was treating the invasion of her world like a minor inconvenience. Commander Brooks, Thax replied, leaning forward in his chair. I am General Thax Mordun of the Korillian Empire. I'm here to accept your unconditional surrender. Ah, unconditional surrender. Brooks nodded thoughtfully. Let me check my schedule. She made a show of consulting something off-screen. How does never work for you? Several of Thax's bridge crew exchanged confused glances. This wasn't following the script at all. Commander, perhaps you don't understand the situation, Thax said slowly, as if explaining to a child. I have 37 ships in orbit around your planet. You have, what, a few hundred soldiers and some farming equipment? 512 soldiers, actually, Brooks corrected. And you're absolutely right about the farming equipment. We've got plenty of that. Then you understand that resistance is futile. Futile? Brooks laughed, and it wasn't the desperate laugh of someone facing certain death. It was genuinely amused. General, has anyone ever told you that you watch too many old movies? Thax felt his left eye start to twitch. This was not how conquered species were supposed to behave. They were supposed to be afraid, or angry, or at least take the situation seriously. This human was acting like they were having a casual conversation at a dinner party. Commander, I'm going to give you one more chance to surrender peacefully, Thax said, his voice taking on a harder edge. After that, I'll be forced to use more aggressive measures. Aggressive measures? Brooks repeated. Is that what you call that little fireworks display you just put on? Because I have to tell you, our 4th of July celebrations are usually more impressive. That was it. Thax had reached his limit of patience for the day. All ships, commence Phase 2 bombardment, he ordered. Target their defensive positions. Show them what aggressive measures really look like. The fleet opened fire with renewed intensity, focusing their weapons on the military installations scattered around the colony. Plasma bolts lit up the night sky as they struck their targets, sending up brilliant flashes of light and debris. For a moment, Thax thought the humans might finally be taking this seriously. The return fire from the surface had stopped almost entirely, and several of their defensive positions appeared to be offline. Then something strange happened. Sir, Weapons Officer Nokdarian called out, "I'm detecting some kind of energy signature from the surface. It's not matching any known defensive systems." "What kind of energy signature?" Thax demanded. "I'm not sure, sir. It's almost like they're redirecting our plasma bolts somehow." Before Thax could respond, the tactical display lit up with warnings. 3 of his ships were reporting minor damage to their hulls. Nothing serious, but damage nonetheless, from an enemy that supposedly had minimal defensive capabilities. "How is that possible?" Thax muttered, studying the readings. "Their technology is centuries behind ours." "Sir," Crick said hesitantly, "perhaps we underestimated their capabilities." "Underestimated?" Thax laughed harshly. "Cricks, I've seen their technology reports. They're using primitive fusion reactors and chemical propulsion systems. They shouldn't be able to scratch our shields, let alone cause hull damage." But even as he said it, Thax could see more warning indicators appearing on his displays. The humans weren't just defending themselves anymore. They were fighting back, and somehow impossibly they were causing actual damage to his fleet. "Commander Brooks," he said, reopening the communication channel, "what exactly are you people doing down there?" Brooks appeared on screen again, and this time she was smiling. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "Oh, you know," she said casually, "just making do with what we have. We humans are pretty good at improvising. It's kind of our thing." "Improvising?" Thax's voice rose an octave. "You're using farming equipment against a space fleet." "Well, when you put it that way, it does sound a bit silly," Brooks admitted. "But you'd be surprised what you can accomplish with a little creativity and a lot of fertilizer." Thax stared at the screen, his mouth hanging open. "Fertilizer?" "Among other things," Brooks said cheerfully. "General, I think you might want to reconsider your tactical approach. Because if this is the best the mighty Korillian Empire can do, we're going to have a very long night ahead of us." The transmission cut out, leaving Thax staring at a blank screen and wondering, for the first time in his military career, if he might have made a serious mistake. 20 minutes later, Thax was beginning to suspect that serious mistake might have been the understatement of the millennium. "Sir," Tactical Officer Yim Keller's voice cracked with panic. "The Ravager is reporting critical damage to their port engine. They're saying something hit them from the surface, but our sensors show no missile launch." Thax spun his chair to face the tactical display, where one of his heavy cruisers was indeed listing badly, trailing plasma and debris. "That's impossible. What kind of weapon doesn't show up on our sensors?" "Unknown, sir. They're describing it as some kind of kinetic projectile, but moving at impossible speeds for primitive technology." Before Thax could respond, another alarm blared across the bridge. Then another, and another. "Status report." Thax barked, his earlier confidence evaporating faster than water on a hot planet. "Multiple ships reporting impacts, sir," Keller stammered. "The destroyer, the Conquest, the Iron Fist all taking damage from unknown projectiles. Our defensive algorithms can't track them because they're not following any logical trajectory patterns." "Not following logical patterns?" Thax's voice rose to a near shriek. "What does that even mean?" "It means," came a new voice from the communications array, "that you're thinking like a computer and we're thinking like humans." The main screen flickered to life again, but this time it wasn't Commander Brooks. Instead, a man in coveralls appeared, his hands dirty and his hair disheveled. He looked like he'd been working in an engine room, which, Thax realized with growing horror, he probably had been. "Let me introduce myself," the man said cheerfully. "Marcus Vale, Chief Engineer of New Harmony Colony. And before you ask, yes, I'm the one turning your fancy space fleet into expensive confetti." Thax found his voice. That's impossible. Our intelligence reports showed no advanced weaponry. Oh, we don't have advanced weaponry, Marcus agreed, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. What we have is a really big mass driver that we usually use for launching cargo pods to orbital stations. Funny thing about physics, General. Acceleration times mass equals force, regardless of whether you're launching a supply crate or a chunk of compressed metal. A cargo launcher. Thax sputtered. You're attacking my fleet with cargo equipment? Well, when you put it that way, it sounds almost insulting, Marcus grinned. But here's the thing about us humans, we're really good at making things work in ways they weren't designed for. Like using agricultural fertilizer as explosive components, or repurposing mining equipment as anti-ship weapons. As if to emphasize his point, another of Thax's ships suddenly lurched sideways, sparks flying from a massive impact to its hull. Sir, Keller's voice was barely a whisper now. The humans appear to be using our own attack patterns against us. Every time we fire on their positions, they somehow redirect the energy back at us. Redirect how? Thax demanded. Marcus must have heard the question because he laughed. Oh, that's my personal favorite. See, your plasma bolts are magnetically contained, right? So we just set up some really powerful electromagnets in strategic locations. When you shoot at us, we catch your shots and throw them back. It's like the galaxy's most dangerous game of catch. Thax felt something that he hadn't experienced in 3 centuries of warfare, genuine fear. This wasn't going according to any tactical manual he'd ever studied. The humans weren't fighting like a military force. They were fighting like engineers and farmers and scientists who'd been forced to defend their home. And somehow, that made them infinitely more dangerous than any professional army. Sir, Communications Officer Maxine called out, we're receiving multiple transmissions from the surface. They're taunting us. Taunting us? Yes, sir. They're broadcasting on open frequencies. Would you like me to put them through? Before Thax could answer, voices began filling the bridge. Multiple human voices, all talking at once, and all sounding far too cheerful for people whose planet was under attack. Hey, Korillian Fleet. This is Jenny from Hydroponics Base 7. Thanks for the target practice. Greetings from the Mining Division. We've got some lovely explosive charges with your names on them. Agricultural Department here. Who wants to try our new and improved fertilizer bombs? Thax listened in growing horror as dozens of human voices chattered away like they were having a party instead of fighting for their lives. They were making jokes, sharing technical tips, and worst of all, they were laughing. Turn it off, Thax shouted. Turn off the communications. But the damage was already done. He could see it in the faces of his crew. The certainty was gone, replaced by confusion and mounting panic. These humans weren't supposed to be enjoying themselves. They were supposed to be terrified, desperate, begging for mercy. Instead, they sounded like they were having the time of their lives. Sir, Keller's voice was shaking now. We've lost the Annihilator. A direct hit to their reactor core. They're evacuating to life pods. Thax stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The Annihilator had been one of his most powerful ships, equipped with shields that could withstand planetary bombardment. And now it was gone, destroyed by beings who shouldn't have been able to scratch its hull. How many ships have we lost? He asked quietly. 4 destroyed, 12 with critical damage, and 6 more reporting various systems failures, Keller replied. Sir, their weapons seem to be getting more effective. It's like they're learning from each engagement. Learning, Thax repeated numbly. That was the problem, wasn't it? His tactical computers were programmed to fight military forces that followed predictable patterns, used standard weapons, and employed logical strategies. But humans, apparently, didn't do any of those things. They improvised. They adapted. They turned farming equipment into weapons of war and somehow made it work. General Marcus Vale's voice cut through the chaos on the bridge. I'm going to give you some free advice. You might want to consider retreating while you still have ships left to retreat with. Retreat? Thax's pride flared. The Korillian Empire does not retreat from primitives. Primitives? Marcus's laugh was genuinely delighted. General, we just turned your invasion fleet into a salvage operation using mining equipment and vegetable fertilizer. But if that makes us primitives, I'd hate to see what we could do if we were actually trying to be advanced. Another alarm sounded, and Thax watched in horror as 2 more ships on his tactical display flashed red. Critical damage. His unstoppable fleet was being systematically dismantled by a bunch of farmers and scientists who were apparently treating the whole thing as a fun engineering challenge. For the first time in his career, General Thax Mordun was beginning to understand that there might be different kinds of intelligence in the galaxy. And he was rapidly discovering that the kind that could turn garbage into weapons might be the most dangerous of all. If Thax thought things couldn't get worse, the next 30 minutes proved him spectacularly wrong. Sir, Lieutenant Crix approached with the kind of expression usually reserved for delivering news of terminal illnesses. We're detecting some kind of biological agent in the atmosphere around our lower ships. Biological agent? Thax turned from the tactical display where he'd been watching his fleet die 1 ship at a time. What kind of biological agent? Unknown, sir. It appears to be some form of aggressive plant spores. They're eating through our hull plating. Thax blinked slowly, certain he'd misheard. Eating through our hull plating? Before Crix could answer, a new face appeared on the communication screen. This time it was a woman with dirt under her fingernails and what appeared to be leaves in her hair. She was smiling with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for people discussing their favorite hobbies. "Hello there," she said brightly. "I'm Elena Vasquez, head botanist for New Harmony Colony. I just wanted to thank you for providing such an excellent test environment for my latest project." "Test environment?" Thax's voice was barely a whisper. "Oh yes, it's been absolutely fascinating," Elena continued, apparently oblivious to the destruction happening around her. "You see, we've been working on developing plants that can survive in the vacuum of space. Turns out, if you give them the right genetic modifications, they're also really good at breaking down metal alloys." As she spoke, Thax watched his sensors track dozens of his ships being slowly consumed by what appeared to be aggressive space moss. The biological agent was spreading from ship to ship, carried by the solar winds and their own maneuvering thrusters. "The really clever part," Elena went on, "is that they're designed to target specific molecular signatures. Basically, they only eat things that aren't from this planet. So our equipment is perfectly safe, but yours," she made a sympathetic clicking sound. "Well, let's just say you might want to consider switching to organic hull plating." "This is biological warfare," Thax protested. "That violates the Galactic Convention on—" "Oh, I'm sorry," Elena interrupted. "Are these the same Galactic Conventions that prohibit unprovoked attacks on civilian populations? Because if so, you might want to read the fine print about defensive countermeasures." Thax opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. She had a point, and they both knew it. Besides, Elena added cheerfully, technically it's not biological warfare. It's aggressive gardening. Another alarm sounded on the bridge, and Thax watched as 3 more ships registered critical system failures. His tactical computers were displaying error messages in languages he didn't recognize, but completely overwhelmed by the sheer variety of unconventional attacks they were trying to process. "Sir," Weapons Officer Darian called out, "the humans appear to have hacked into our targeting systems. Every time we try to lock onto their positions, our weapons automatically target our own ships instead." "How is that possible?" "They're using our own communication protocols against us, sir. Somehow they've figured out how to make our computers think we're the enemy." Thax stared at the tactical display in mounting horror. Half his fleet was being eaten by space plants. The other half was shooting at itself because the humans had convinced their computers that up was down and friend was foe. And through it all, the cheerful voices of the colonists continued to broadcast across every frequency, offering technical advice and sharing recipes for explosive fertilizer. "General," came Commander Brooks' voice over the communication system, "I think it's time we discuss terms." "Terms?" Thax's voice cracked. You want to negotiate surrender terms? Oh, I'm not surrendering, Brooks replied, sounding genuinely confused. I was going to offer you surrender terms, because at this rate, you're not going to have much of a fleet left to retreat with. Thax looked at his tactical display. Of his original 37 ships, only 19 were still combat capable. The rest were either destroyed, disabled, or being slowly digested by carnivorous space plants. This is impossible, he muttered. You're farmers. You're scientists. You shouldn't be able to. General, Brooks interrupted gently. That's your problem right there. You keep thinking about what we should be able to do instead of paying attention to what we're actually doing. And that's when it hit him. The magnitude of his mistake wasn't just tactical or strategic. It was conceptual. He'd spent 3 centuries conquering civilizations that fought the way military academies taught them to fight. Organized, predictable, logical. But humans, apparently, had never read those textbooks. All ships, Thax said quietly, his shoulders sagging in defeat. Prepare for retreat. Sir? Crix looked stunned. You heard me? Thax replied. Signal the fleet. We're withdrawing from this system. Immediately. As his remaining ships began to pull back from the planet, Thax couldn't help but wonder what the Emperor would say when he reported that the mighty Korillian Empire had been defeated by a bunch of farmers armed with garden tools and an attitude problem. Somehow he didn't think they turned their vegetables into weapons was going to sound like an acceptable excuse. 3 weeks later, General Thax Mordun stood in the Imperial throne room, staring at his boots and trying to figure out how to explain the greatest military disaster in Korillian history to Emperor Vakzorin without sounding completely insane. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, the Emperor said, his voice carrying the kind of deadly calm that made seasoned warriors wet themselves. You took 37 ships, the pride of our Third Fleet, to conquer a single human agricultural colony. Yes, Your Majesty. And you returned with 12 functioning vessels, half of which are still being treated for some kind of plant infection. The space moss was particularly aggressive, Your Majesty. Space moss. The Emperor's voice could have frozen plasma. You're telling me that farmers defeated our fleet using space moss? Thax cleared his throat nervously. Among other things, Your Majesty. There was also the weaponized fertilizer, the hacked targeting systems, the cargo launcher they converted into a mass driver, and the electromagnets they used to redirect our plasma bolts back at us. I see. The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. And what was your assessment of their military capabilities before the attack? Primitive, Your Majesty. Centuries behind our technology. And no significant defensive capabilities. Primitive. The Emperor repeated the word like he was tasting something unpleasant. These primitive farmers just humiliated the Korillian Empire in front of half the galaxy. That was the worst part, really. Word of the defeat had spread through the galactic communication networks faster than a plague. The mighty Korillian Empire, conquerors of 1,000 worlds, beaten by a colony that grew vegetables and apparently had a sense of humor about interstellar warfare. Your Majesty, Thax said carefully, I believe we may need to revise our intelligence assessment of human capabilities. You think so? The Emperor's sarcasm could have stripped paint. What gave you that impression? The fact that they turned your invasion fleet into scrap metal, or the part where they broadcast cooking recipes while doing it? Both, Your Majesty. The Emperor stood from his throne and began pacing, which was never a good sign. Do you know what the Zentoran High Command sent me yesterday? There's a formal request to join our alliance. Not because they fear our military might, but because they're terrified of what the humans might do if we leave them alone long enough to get really creative. Thax winced. He'd heard the stories filtering in from across the galaxy. Other civilizations were watching the humans with a mixture of fascination and terror, wondering what kind of species could turn gardening supplies into weapons of mass destruction. The Regellian Trade Consortium has already opened diplomatic relations with them, the Emperor continued. They want to study human engineering techniques. Apparently, the ability to weaponize agricultural equipment is considered a valuable skill in certain circles. "What are your orders, Your Majesty?" Thax asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "New standing order for all Imperial forces," the Emperor announced. "Under no circumstances are we to engage human colonies or territories. They are to be added to the protected species list, right between the Vorkan mind readers and the crystalline hive mind of Kepler-18. "The protected species list, Your Majesty?" "The list of civilizations too dangerous to mess with," the Emperor explained. "Species that might look harmless, but will ruin your entire day if you're stupid enough to attack them." As Thax left the throne room, stripped of his rank but somehow still alive, he couldn't help but reflect on the galaxy's new political reality. The humans had done something no military force had managed in over a millennium. They'd made the Korillian Empire afraid. And the really terrifying part? They'd done it while laughing. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Thax wondered what those primitive humans were working on now. Whatever it was, he was pretty sure the galaxy wasn't ready for it. After all, if they could turn vegetables into weapons, what could they do with actual weapons? He decided he really didn't want to find out.